Our moderator is NewsCenter Maine reporter, anchor, and co-host of the evening news magazine program 207, Rob Caldwell. When I asked Rob if he could send me his CV to write up his biography, he said he didn't have one, which he says is what happens when one spends 35 years in the same job and doesn't get out much. What he did say was the following, in his own words, because I couldn't make anything else better of it. Majored in American history and literature at Williams College. Equipped with that fine education, I went looking for employment after graduation and managed to land a job as a cab driver. I worked in Portland at what I was told was the largest taxi stand north of Boston. Lasted 3 hours on the job, then took early retirement. Similar career path to David Mallett, as it turns out. From there, it was on to work as a bellhop and substitute teacher. Eventually was hired as an intern at a radio station in Portland, then as a reporter. In 35 years as a reporter, have covered stories from Paris, Maine to Paris, France. Interviewed pro wrestlers and presidential candidates, flown with the Blue Angels, sailed on windjammers, set foot on the emerald grass at Fenway Park. As far as I know, I am the only reporter in Maine who has done stories in both the plant that produces Allen's coffee brandy and the one that makes B&M baked beans. It's very surprising that they never put those two together, isn't it, really? I think you'll all agree that odds and ends aside, Rob Caldwell is very well qualified to be our featured interviewer. I'd like to thank Rob for agreeing to be part of this Framing Maine event and for driving up here from Portland to be with us tonight. So Rob and David, if you would retake the stage, please.
Yeah.
We're off to a good start because David and I were just chatting away over there.
Yeah, we were. Talking about Channel 2.
It turns out that we both spent time at Channel 2 WLBZ in Bangor. We'll maybe get to that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for sticking around for the interview. I know it's a big come down when you go from Dave and the three talented musicians to David and me, so thank you for sticking around. Let me begin with you, Dr. Mallett. You grew up not far from the bright lights of Dover-Foxcroft in Seeber. What was it like when you were a kid where clearly you had to create your own entertainment as a boy? So when you were 8, 9, 10 years old, what were you into? Books, comic books, sports, being outside in the fields and the woods? How did you amuse yourself?
8, 9, 10. I used to take a football and I'd throw it up on the shed roof, and it would roll down and I'd catch it. I'd do that for hours. I'd throw the football up on the shed roof and it would roll and I'd catch it. That was one way. The usual stuff. I had a dog. I lived on a farm. We had cows. We had sheep when I was little, and I belonged to the 4-H. And there was always music. There was always music around.
How old were you when you first picked up an instrument? And I assume that the first instrument was a guitar?
It was, yeah. I was about 10.
You were about 10. All right. Play for us a little bit of the first song you ever learned to play on the guitar.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh. I recognize that.
Tom Dooley.
Yeah, yeah.
Big hit for the Kingston
Hang down
Trio.
your head, Tom. That was an earth-shattering moment when I heard that on the radio. It was wonderful. It was about 1959, I think that was a hit. Yeah.
So that was at 10 that you picked up the guitar and started to play, and within a year, at age 11, you and your brother were an act, the Mallett brothers.
Well, you know, my brother Neil, he was the first one to get a guitar. He got an archtop, a K archtop. I forget where we picked it up, probably Viner's, I think. And then he played and I sang, and then I got really bored. I didn't know what to do with my hands, and so I got to get a guitar too. So we went back to Viner's, and I got a guitar, and it was $120. It was a Martin. It was a pretty nice guitar for $120.
What kind of songs did you guys play?
We, everything. I mean, we did the one I've mentioned. We did How Many Roads Must a Man Walk Today? And we did, let's see, give me a minute. The moon was out, the stars were bright, the larks were singing free. Come listen while I sing about my old brown coat and me. Now Mary Braid was very proud and haughty as can be, and she often said she'd never wed my old brown coat and me. That's an old ballad. That's from Lee Moore, the coffee-drinking Nighthawk in Wheeling, West Virginia. And it was a Sinatra song we did. So I'm down and so I'm out, so are many others, and so I feel like trying to hide my head beneath these covers. Life is like the seasons, after winter comes the spring. So I think I'll smile a while and see what tomorrow brings. That was a Sinatra song that Rod McEwen wrote. We did that. We did a long time ago when the earth was green. There were more kinds of animals than you've ever seen, and they run around free when the earth was being born. But the loveliest of all was the unicorn. I mean, you name it, we did it.
Well, obviously you loved folk, and that was a huge influence. Did you resist the lure of the siren call of rock and roll?
We played acoustic guitars. For some reason, I never got into the electric guitar, and that seemed to be prerequisite. But we would do, I'm trying to think, we did a Beatles tune. I love you every day, always on my mind. One thing I can say with me all the time. 8 days a week. That's about as raucous as we got.
Now, you and your brother at one point appeared on a TV show here, not here in Bangor, down the road in Bangor, on Channel 2. What was that experience like for you?
Well, they had a show back in local TV was so much fun in the old days. And they had a show called Spotlight on Youth. And I forget who the host was, but it ran from like 61 through 65. And when I was 11, we went on, Neil and I, and he played and sang harmony, and I sang, and we won. We won. It was an applause meter or something. I forget how they voted. Maybe people called in, but we won. And then we came back a few months later for the semifinals, and we won those too. It was a different song. And then in the meanwhile, I had turned 12 years old. And I was getting a little attitude. And then we came back for the finals, and we lost the finals to a baton twirler. That's just, it was hard to get over that one. But
obviously, when you were appearing in Spotlight on Youth, you wanted to have your A game. Do you, by any chance, remember any of the songs that you played in any of those performances?
Oh, Spotlight on Youth?
Yeah. Ooh. What did you bring to impress the crowd in hopes that you would defeat the baton twirler?
I just can't understand how you could hurt me so, then turn and walk away, pretending you don't know. Each time I see you out with someone new, I go out of my mind over you. That was one.
It certainly sounds as though you loved being an entertainer, even from that young age. Did you, at that time, in any way think of yourself as a storyteller?
Not really. although the songs we sang were ballads, a lot of them, you know, and those were stories. But to me, storytellers were like, you know, Marshall Dodge and Bert and I. And somebody tonight mentioned a record called Saturday Night in Dover Foxcroft. Anybody ever remember that? It was a comedy record. I forget who did it, but it was recorded in front of the Portland Rotary Club in about 1959. And it was a comedy album, Maine humor, wonderful stuff. And the title of the album was Saturday Night in Dover Foxcroft.
Weirdly enough, that was done by a guy named Bruce McGorrell.
Yes, I had the record.
Ran the TV stations where I have spent my entire career.
No kidding. Wonderful. I have a copy of that. It's pretty rare.
Gospel truth. All right, let's fast forward a little bit to your years at the University of Maine. I think people might be a little bit surprised by your academic pursuit. What was your major here, David?
I was a theater major. I came because I like being on stage, and there was nothing else that I really wanted to do. I was kind of spoiled. So I came, and I did theater in high school, and I liked it. And we did some statewide contests and went and had some fun. And then I came to Orono, and I'm trying to think. Herschel Bricker was the head of the department, and I did a few plays. And Al Cyrus and I became real good friends. And Al was the head of the department for a long time. And but the guitar was always, you know, singing was always the thing.
At what point did you start writing your own songs? Was it while you were here at the university?
After I left, I think. Yeah, around 74 or 73.
I'll get to that in just a sec, but I'm curious. You talked about the places you played here and how you didn't necessarily have a 100% attendance record and so forth. How did, though, the University of Maine shape you?
I met all kinds of people from all over the state. Met some great players, some great guitar players. And the Ram's Horn Coffee House was our... Anybody remember the Ram's Horn? That's a great place. That was our coffee house, and if you wrote a song, you could go over there and sing it, and people would listen. That was real important to have. And I remember during the moratorium in 1970 when they canceled school in protest of the war, a bunch of us wound up in the little space between North Stevens Hall and South Stevens. And I remember somebody was singing there, and all the people were singing around singing anti-war songs. That was a strong experience. Thinking, during the moratorium, they gathered and sang songs in this little, you know what I'm talking about? South Stevens, North Stevens.
There are a lot of, obviously, young people who, when they finish up college, they want to make a big change in their life. And often what they want to do is they want to go somewhere else. You had spent your entire life in Maine. When you finished up here at the university, did you have any desire to leave Maine?
I wanted to go to Nashville, and I always did. I wanted to go there and check it out, and I ended up doing that for about 10 years. But Maine was always such a strong... I always felt very lucky to be from Maine. My cousins would come up from Connecticut. I thought, you poor suckers. It's like... I'd go visit them, and I thought, wow, you got to live here all year round? It's like... New Jersey, same thing, man. Woo. I felt lucky to be in Maine, and I had a strong... My mother's family has lived in, like, they were the first settlers of the county, white settlers of Piscataquis County, and I was always very aware of that. And I felt sort of obligated to hang in, you know?
People may not know just how deep your roots run in Subic. You've lived in the same farmhouse for basically your entire life, except for when you were in at Nashville for part of the year. But you grew up in that house with 4 siblings, have lived there your adult life,
4 older brothers.
Raised 3 kids there, and are still there. I mean, talk about a sense of rootedness in Maine.
It's kind of an Irish thing. I'm not really Irish, but I have that same kind of sensibility, I guess. I always wanted to give my kids a sense of place that I had. And when I started writing songs, I didn't know where to go. I didn't want to write Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog. It didn't work for me. And I wanted to write, I started to write about where I was from. I knew this place, I knew it well, every sound and every smell. And every time I walked, I fell for the first 2 years or so. That was a song about the house I grew up in and this big old tree out front, the front yard, and all the things I remembered from my childhood.
So you just said that you really started to write songs soon after
College.
Soon after college. The Garden Song was in your body of work, song number...
Oh, 2 or 3, really.
Second or third effort,
Yeah.
The Garden Song.
It really was. And I don't know, it was 74, and I was helping my father. We were working in the garden. We were working on a horse stall. We had just built a little horse stall. We always had a radio on when we were carpentering. I did anyway. And I think it had something to do with Moon Shadow. Moon Shadow came on, and then I was working in the garden, and I got this little thing, like, bye, bye. It was almost, it had the same kind of tempo as Moon Shadow. And I wrote the verse, the chorus, and then I went out on the steps. I left the old man in the garden. I went on the steps, because that's the way it goes, you know. You just take a pad and you write down what you can. And I thought, this is kind of neat. And then that night, I was visiting my friend Scotty over in Old Town, Forrest Scott. And I sat at his kitchen table and I wrote the verse, and the first verse and the second verse, put it all together.
Did you have any idea of...
No.
Or on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being junk, 10 being greatness, what did you think of that song?
8, maybe. I thought, nice song, and I thought maybe somebody would record it, but it was just another one, you know, another song. And
Well, it was your second or third
I know,
song.
I know. Yeah, pretty wild. Pretty wild.
Throughout the 1970s, you got bigger, you toured, traveled all over the country. And how did you like those years? How did you like being on the road, which is an existence that can be really challenging? And especially, I would think, for a kid who grew up on a farm in Quebec.
Oh, yeah.
What was it like to be out on the road?
Yeah, it was mixed. I like creating order out of chaos, which it is pretty much. You go in a strange place, like you fly in, you have a couple hours, you go to the hotel, and then you got to create this sort of thing. That's always a challenge. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the long drives. I like driving across different landscapes.
How did that change your songwriting? Because when you're in the car on those long drives, you got a lot of ideas rattling around in your head. And how did it change your thinking about imagery and places and telling stories, being out, in the cornfields of Kansas or out in the deserts of Arizona for a guy who was so used to the woodlands of Maine?
Yeah. Well, didn't really alter it. I think I felt like I was taking my little... Noel Stuckey always told me what was important was your point of view. And wherever you were, you still have your point of view, you know. So I felt I took my... When I was in Nashville, I was writing songs that a guy from Maine would write. Sort of, pretty much.
I'm going to ask you about that in a sec, but it was in the 1970s that people started covering your songs.
Yeah.
What was it like for you to hear other artists
Such a thrill.
telling your story in their voices?
Gordon Bach was the first one to record one of my songs, and he and Ann Muir did a record called The Ways of Man, I believe. They did the Garden Song. They did I Knew This Place. And then I got a cassette from Pete Seeger with him singing the Garden Song, and then he changed a few lyrics, and he wrote the lyrics that he had changed, and he asked me if it was okay. And that was such a thrill, you know. And then the John Denver thing was, because John was one of my idols. Everybody loved John Denver in the 70s. He, owned it. far out. I mean, man, the guy was everywhere. And then he cut the garden song, and then he cut a couple more, and it's like, he's talking about me from stage everywhere. It's like he's doing a concert in front of 12,000 people, and he's talking about Dave Mallett up in Maine who wrote these great songs. It's like, it's kind of cool. I remember another incident I had at one point. I was hanging out with Peter, Paul, and Mary, and they were doing a show somewhere. This is like in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And I was hanging out backstage, and I got Mary Travers sitting here with a Walkman, listening to a CD of mine of Emmylou Harris singing one of my songs. So I got Emmylou Harris, one of the great American vocalists, and Mary Travis, another iconic American vocalist, and Mary is critiquing Emmylou's performance of my song, which was pretty cool. You know? Oh, do you think she did a good job? Well, I don't know. Mary was tough, I'll tell you.
In the mid-1980s, you left Maine and went to Nashville. Why did you go?
Oh, to meet people and stretch my wings. Nancy Griffith called me up. I was in Dixmont, and this girl named Nancy Griffith, she had kind of a big thing for a few years. She calls me up and says, "Joe, you got to come down here." And I had been going down and like shaking hands and stuff, but she kind of gave me some people to meet, and it was kind of fun. It was pretty exciting.
That's a much different experience for a songwriter, because a lot of songwriters, you talk about, you go out behind the barn and,
right.
Maybe inspiration strikes and you jot down the lyrics and you get a song going. But down there, you report to work, in
You go to
effect,
work in the morning,
and
yeah.
write songs, correct?
You set an appointment. It's like 10 o'clock, and you meet, and you have coffee, and one guy will have an idea, and it works.
Do you remember the first song that you ever wrote in Nashville? Or one of the first?
No, this wasn't a co-write. That was one of my songs. On rain on the street makes me light on my feet when I hurry. And I listen and guess I'm getting nowhere, so I guess I got plenty of time. And I got neon lights and money for now, so why do I worry? It's just that memories of home keep tugging hard on these heartstrings of mine. And from what I can see of the city life, it's 500,000 dreamers and another 500,000 sleepless nights. That might have been one of them right there. I had some good experiences co-writing. A fellow named Alan Estes came in one day and he said, "I got an idea. It's called," Alan was from Boston, North Shore, and he lived in Nashville, and big guy, always full of fun. And he said, "I got a song, the title is Here I Am, There You Are, Here We Go." And then we just went from there, And I said, "Maybe we should talk this over. Maybe we should take it slow. Too far gone, no turning back now. Here I am, there you are, here we go." That turned out real well.
Wow, I want to hear more of that.
But I think my best songs, the ones that define me, are the ones that I wrote by myself, and usually in a cold room somewhere in Maine, with the wind blowing outside.
Well, I was wondering, when you showed up in Nashville, and at that time, country music was really starting to take off and enjoy a commercial success that it had not had in years before. It was more of a niche category until about the time you got there, the 1980s, and then it really started to go big. Now, when you showed up in Nashville, you weren't wearing a 10-gallon cowboy hat, and your daddy hadn't chopped cotton, and you didn't come with any of those sort of country stereotypes. What did the people down there make of this guy from Maine?
Well, they thought he was an oddball. But I was always respected. I had a lot of friends and a lot of, I was different. I think being from Maine really makes you different. Even being from the rest of New England doesn't matter. Being from Maine makes you different, you know. And there are a lot of songwriters, like, from the rest of New England, but there weren't that many from Maine down there, and I could lock into the accent if I had to.
Well, this is something that has interested me for a long time.
We use more words. Northern writers, northern songwriters were closer. I look at music as geographically evolving from east to west. And I think being from New England, you're close to the Maritimes, you're close to Europe. When you move down south, they use less words. They do. Texas songwriters use less words than guys up here. They're more economical. You know what I mean?
I don't know, because the people in the South, I think the stereotype actually in a lot of ways is the reverse, that in the South people are talkers and there's this great oral tradition, and they think that Yankees are kind of laconic and taciturn.
I think musically we talk more. The Northerners. I don't know. It's a different thing. And I also don't have, the South has a strong blues influence, and I never had that. I had more like the maritime fiddle type traditional.
Is there really a Maine tradition of music, would you say?
I think so. I think so. It's Canadian. It's fiddle, and I don't know if it's guitar, it's something else. Anybody else know? I'm not real. I know I've been around a long time, and I worked with a lot of people, and I think of Hal Lone Pine and Slim Clark and Dick Curlis and those people as the founders of Maine music, you know.
I'm sure that when you were down in Nashville, you had people telling you what to do in a way you never did when you were back in Maine. There were other songwriters, or there were artists, or there were record company people, whatever. Did you ever write a song down there that you really loved and that you thought was a winner, and they said, "David, that is crap. I don't even want to hear that again"?
You mean, I probably blocked it out. I don't know. I've always thought that there is a point when you write a song and it's new and you think it's the best thing ever written, and then a little later you write another one, you know. And that's the newest one, you know.
Have you got maybe a favorite from the Nashville years?
I'm thinking. Old habits die hard. Some wounds never heal. We got what we came for. This is part of the deal. But I can't forget you. I can't even try. Sometimes it seems like somebody died. But old soldiers die hard, and old heads hang low, and old friends go easy, and old lovers just go. That's one of them.
As I understand it, when you were down in Nashville, you were there for most of the year, but you would come back to Maine in the summer. You spent roughly a decade down there. What was it that made you say, all right, it's time to go back to Maine and live there year-round?
Well, my kids were getting bigger. My oldest son was going to be going into middle school. And living in the city, living in the South, I wanted my kids to be raised in Maine. You know, I really, with their cousins and all that. And it was time, you know. I think also it was when Achy Breaky Heart was the song of the year. I think that had something to do with it. Time to get out of here, maybe.
I can see how that would make the decision a lot easier. How did it feel when you got back to Maine?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, the kids, it's like we fixed up the farmhouse and got the kids in school and they played hockey, and taking my kids to hockey games was one of the best experiences. I loved hockey then. I haven't been to a game since they left, you know, but I was there every time. A little story about Nashville and Dick Curlis. Can I go back to this?
Absolutely.
Dick, when I lived in Nashville, Dick Curlis lived there too. And we used to see each other for coffee and supper once in a while. And he'd come to my gigs, and I'd play a club in Nashville, and I'd have a band of studio musicians, like 18 guys. They'd come in, they'd do a gig for me for $15, $20. And we'd put on a show, and Dick Curlis would always show up. Not always, but he'd often show up. And all of these guys playing with me, they'd go, "Is that Dick Curlis? Holy shit, that's Dick Curlis." They were like blown away that I knew Dick Curlis. It was cool. And he'd wear his patch, you know, and he'd come in and he'd sit in back, and he took me to a an old-time musicians banquet. It was a union thing for old guys. And there were a couple hundred people there, and it was a banquet, and then they all got up and sang. And we're sitting, Dick and I are sitting at this table, and there's another fellow at the table, and we're talking. It turns out this old guy, his name was Danny Dill, and he was a songwriter, and he wrote Detroit City. And I'm sitting here, and I thought, man. And then he told me he wrote Long Black Veil, and I'm thinking, whoa, this guy. That's the kind of people you run into in Nashville, you know.
It's interesting that you mentioned Dick Curlis, Tombstone Every Mile. Let's leave your own work aside. What would you consider sort of the quintessential Maine song, the song that to you really captures, reflects, exemplifies the state of Maine?
You mean aside from Tombstone Every Mile?
I'd vote for Tombstone Every Mile for what that's worth. Well, what would I want to know what you would?
I always like to say there are three real famous songs from Maine. And there are. There's Philistines to Dear Old Maine, Shout Till the Rafters Ring. I don't know the words of that, but it's got a lot to do with drinking, I think. That was Rudy Valley, and he went to school here for a while, I think. And then Dick Curlis's Tombstone Every Mile. I remember when it was recorded down at WABI Studios. Yeah, he recorded that there, and that was like 64, 65. And then there was the Garden Song. I think those are the three most well-known songs that have come out of Maine.
I don't think you're going to get any argument on that list. Speaking of fame and running into people, here's a story that I just want to get confirmed or shot down. In the 1980s, you were recording in a fancy studio outside of Boston. Your allotted time was up. They said, you got to leave because Aerosmith is coming in. And you said?
Who's Aerosmith? I didn't have a clue. Yeah, I remember that. There's a studio called Blue Jay, and it was a pretty expensive studio. It was in Lexington or Concord or somewhere. Carlisle, Mass. And I lived in Freeport at the time, and I'd drive from Freeport to Carlisle and record, and then sometimes drive back, sometimes sleep in the van. But one night we were down there, and we had to get out early because they had a band coming in. And it was Aerosmith. I didn't know who the hell they were.
I love it when storytelling has kind of a big arc that comes back to where the story began. You began your career as a member of the Mallett Brothers.
Right.
Now your sons have a successful band, the Mallett Brothers. What kind of an influence do you think you have had on them in terms of songwriting?
I think have a lot of stuff. We always had a lot of stuff playing in the house. We'd play The Who, and we'd play Jim Croce, and then we'd play Gordon Lightfoot, and then John Denver, and I think a lot of different stuff. Tom Petty playing all the time in the house. And I think they know that it's a meat and potatoes job. You know, you sit down with nothing and a piece of paper and you come up with a song. And I think I used to have an office in Nashville in my basement, in my cellar. And the kids would come down before bed and say goodnight. I'd be in there with, maybe I have a guy in there with me, we'd be writing together, or maybe I'd in there with 2 or 3 guitars and just trying to put out a song. And I think it was an interesting way for them to grow up. But I'm so proud of that they would think enough of the work that I do to try to continue it. It's great.
And what influence has their music had on your music and your storytelling?
I think they've made me more proud of what I do, perhaps. They've also sort of brought me a new audience. I mean, I've been here a long time, and suddenly the voice come out, and it's unique to have a guy like me that's been doing it so long, and then the kids come along, and it's kind of a unique story. They've added a little bit of spark to my career as well.
All right, let's end.
That's great.
Let's end on this one, David. Someone comes along and makes you an offer, says, I'll give you $1 million, tax-free, but on one condition: you can never again set foot in the state of Maine.
Oh, man. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. Not for $1 million, nah. Would you? That's not that much money. That's not much money, really. I could piss that away in no time. Would any of you do that? I mean, really?
The man just turned down an offer of $1 million, so I think that the least that everyone can do when heading out tonight is to stop at the merchandise table out in front and help him out.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, I want to open it up and take a few questions from the audience for Dr. Mallett. Who's got a question? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that writer, Long Black Veil.
Yeah.
Isn't that one of the songs that your sons currently have that's pretty special and has gotten a lot of airplay?
No, Long Black Veil's an old song that I learned when I was a kid. And that may have, that's Long Black Veil, Long Black Braid. Interesting. But Long Black Veil, probably a lot of people, it's, she walks these hills in a long black veil. And I met the guy that wrote that. That was cool. But no, I never thought of that. That's a good, and Luke has a song that goes, she had a long was born. Yeah.
I think of songs like Phil Brown and the song about your dad and Hometown Heroes. Are those based on some of your life experience?
They're all real people. Phil Brown was an old man, lived in my town, who was an artist. He was a heavy drinker, first and foremost, but he was an artist, and he painted wonderfully. He's a wonderful painter, and there were paintings of his around, a few in the library, a few in the hospital, and he was a real bohemian and cool old guy. And I wrote a song about him in 1978, and I knew a painter in my younger days, a man who lived with brushes, sticks, and stones. His days were filled with canvas scenes of browns and blues and meadow greens, and the world just passed on by his door. He lived but lived alone. Anyway, that's a song about Phil Brown, and They're all real. Yes, ma'am.
Tell the story of taking your mom and dad back to Nova Scotia.
Oh, that story. My father was from Digby, Nova Scotia. He left there in the 20s, moved to Milo, early 30s, moved to Milo, met my mother, had a bunch of kids, never went anywhere again. Until he was old, and my brothers decided to take him. I was doing a show over there, actually. I was doing a show with Pete Seeger in Nova Scotia. And my brothers decided to take my father and drive him to Nova Scotia and make a little vacation of it. And they took him to my concert with Pete Seeger and Arlo Guthrie, and then the next day, they went down to this little village of his in Digby, the other side of the island. And he hadn't been there in 50 years. Little Salmon River, a little town. And they got out of the station wagon, and he walked up the steps and in the front door, and the old man behind the counter looked up and said, "Hi, Aubrey." 50 years later, that's a true story. And he said, "Hi, Aubrey, my old man's name was Aubrey." And he said, and my uncle was Norman. He says, "Hi, Aubrey, how's Norman?" Ain't that wild? I love that. That story just blew me away. That's a true story. My brothers will verify that. They were there.
I think that it would probably be fitting to end the evening with a little music. So I think maybe let's try this. Since this university played a key role in your life, and this is really where you began to perform in public, what would be a song that maybe you would play at the end of the night when you were at the Bear's Den or wherever, someplace around here? Give us a little bit of a song to take us home.
Well, I was in a fraternity when I was here, and one night somebody. No, this was the deal. One of my buddies in the fraternity was from Connecticut, and I was in Connecticut visiting him over Christmas break. And we went to a party, and at the party somebody put on a Gordon Lightfoot record. And the song was, "It's so nice to meet an old friend and pass the time of day and talk about the hometown a million miles away. Is the ice still in the river? Are the old folks still the same? And by the way, did she mention my name? Did she mention my name just in passing? And when the talk ran high, did the look in her eye seem far away? Won't you say hello from someone? There'll be no need to explain. And by the way, did she mention my name?" That would have been one of them right there. You know? I think that song, above all, was the song that started me wanting to write songs. That really started me wanting to write tunes, and I got to tell him that years later. You know?
Well, we all owe a debt of gratitude to that song, as well our thanks to the University of Maine, to the Framing Maine series. Thank you, everyone who came out and made this such a special night, and most of all, a profound thank you to Dr. David Mallett.
That was great.